Okay, grand. I think we're going to begin. So welcome to the Festival of Finance panel, Banks Under Siege, How to Defend Against Cyber Attacks. I'm Joy Macknight, Technology Editor at The Banker, and I'm happy to welcome my distinguished panelists. I have Gottfried Leibran, CEO of Swift. So Gottfried was appointed CEO in July 2012, and he was a key architect behind the creation of the Swift 2015 strategy, which is being implemented and remains a priority for the cooperative. Next to him is Will Dixon, Director of Intelligence at GIS at Barclays. Will heads up the cyber intelligence teams for Barclays Bank in London. He recently joined the financial sector from central UK government, where he had worked for a decade in operational capacity, principally within cybercrime. Next to him is James Chappell, CTO and co-founder of Digital Shadows, which provides a complete view of a customer's digital footprint, identifying defense weaknesses and data loss. He has over 12 years' experience of technical information security, acting as an advisor to large private sector and government organizations. And on your right is Jonathan Luff, co-founder of Cyber London, a startup accelerator to foster a more robust security ecosystem in the UK. Jonathan is an experienced former diplomat and advisor to the British Prime Minister. So I have to say, obviously, cybersecurity is a sizzling hot issue today. It's keeping everyone awake at night, especially the banks, which have both customer data but also money to keep safe. And this year, the global banking industry was shocked after the reports of a successful hacking of the Bangladesh central bank, which led to a loss of over $80 million. And not long after, banks in Vietnam and Ecuador also reported breaches. And to be honest, I think there's probably a lot more out there that also have been attacked. And so the hackers are using very specific methodology. The attackers use malware to circumvent the bank's local security systems, and they gain access to credentials for the SWIFT messaging network, and then sent fraudulent messages via SWIFT to initiate cash transfers from accounts at larger banks. So this has had huge ramifications on the global banking industry, exposing its vulnerability to the growing sophistication in cybercrime. And I think there's two sort of chilling points to this story. On the one hand, as I said, there's other banks have been targeted using similar methods to get around local security systems. And these attacks were also likened to a Sony attack, the Sony hack that happened a few years ago. But also it's exposed, in many ways, the bank's blind faith in the trusted SWIFT messaging network. And I think it shook them to the core. And that is despite the fact that SWIFT's network and core services weren't compromised by the hackers. So it's a credit to SWIFT that the consortium reacted promptly and laid out a number of action points. So Gottfried, could you really outline SWIFT's response, what measures it's taking, and then also what it's asking banks within the network to do?
Thank you. And maybe to put it a bit in context, I think there's two reactions to this. On the one hand, a lot of banks say this is traditional input fraud. Somebody obtains keys to a system and manages to do bad things, and that's not new. That's banks have dealt with that. Banks are used to dealing with fraud cases. I think that's the good news. What is new here is that it can be done remotely, breaching systems, etc. And that is an issue. So that therefore we said at the end of the day, this is about the security of the local environment of banks, and that environment we cannot secure. Banks have to secure their own environment. At the same time, we are stepping up an effort to lead an effort across the industry to increase that security. And that's really our diagnosis is the best way to solve this is not through a single measure, silver bullet. It really is multiple lines of defense, which is the same approach that people take everywhere in credit card fraud, transfer fraud, etc. So it has to be about shoring up the overall security inside banks, shoring up the security of the systems that are used to initiate high-value payments, having controls once these payments get to the receiving banks, that you don't blindly execute, but you have algorithms that check against pattern recognition. And then there's a final stage where large amounts of cash are taken out of the system through money laundering, etc. And at the end of the day, we think that this has to be about all these stages and shoring it up. And if you do that, you can change what is potentially threatening for an individual bank into what is a manageable nuisance for the system as a whole. So to do that, we're launching, along these lines of defense, one, a big initiative to share that information. And for us, it's crucial that banks share that information, and we can have a discussion. That's not always easy, because this cuts to the core of what a bank does, which is based on trust, and nobody wants to go public that trust with a breach, because that potentially gets to the trust issue. So we're now getting banks to share that. We do that in an anonymized way. We then make the indications of compromise available to the community, just so that they can protect themselves. So that's one thing we got going. The second one is enhancing the tools that we and competitors and others provide inside the local environment of banks to generate SWIFT payments and monitor them. So that's the second big piece. Third piece is around frameworks for minimum standards of that environment, password protections, segregation of duty, air gapping terminals, all of that stuff, which is a set of frameworks that you can then audit against, and you can make transparent to counterparties, to overseers, to us, etc. That's the third one. The fourth one is around controls at the receiving end, and maybe also on the network. What can you detect in anomalies when something weird happens, etc. And then the fifth one is around creating an ecosystem of suppliers that can help the banks, because this is about the security inside 10,000 banks that are on our network. That's going to be a big effort, often in geographies that don't have a local IT infrastructure and skill base to do that. So the fifth is around creating such an ecosystem of suppliers, of auditors, IT vendors, cyber firms, etc., to help the banking industry.
But you also made the comment that some banks that may have a too low security level that may not be able to stay on the SWIFT network. Can you respond to that? And because obviously there's been a lot of critique around that in terms of if you push banks off the SWIFT network, then the possibility is they even become more unsafe, or the network as a whole becomes more unsafe.
So this is beautiful. We've said, and I will stick to that nothing is off the table. We'll consider all solutions. We have a bunch of people who said, SWIFT, you should set the bar. People should not be on the network. Then immediately you get your reaction. Well, if you cut them off the network, you drive them behind other banks, they're not going to disappear from the banking system, but we'll just have less visibility. So I think we're going to lean towards multiple enforcement mechanisms. One is there is a role for supervisors in central banks. They have to set minimum standards for the banking system as a whole. They can do it in a way that's a level playing field and that people cannot escape. I think its second part is for people that do business over our network. A big part of doing business over SWIFT is bilateral between banks. I think we have 10,000 banks on the network. That's potentially 100 million combinations. We only have 1 million pairs that are active. And we have a mechanism that allows you to only do business with banks you want to do business with. So there's a whole process around deciding who you do business with from a KYC perspective, money laundering perspective, and now also security. So part of it is providing transparency to banks on the other side of the pipe. This is what the security practices are, and then they can decide what they do. They may not do business, or they may do business with a certain level of control. They can adapt their controls accordingly. So I think we will see multiple mechanisms of forcing banks to increase it, but cutting them off may not be the main one.
But will SWIFT play a role in that kind of audit, like auditing its members?
I think we'll play a role in helping set standards, especially around our immediate environment at the customer end. But that has to be embedded in overall frameworks. And CPMI 3 days ago came out with a whole cyber framework for financial market infrastructures, so the likes of central counterparties, ACHs, and what have you. We see a role to have a similar framework for banks itself, and then we can embed our controls in there, and then various regulators can enforce that. So they're
Okay. Well, you've brought up a lot of interesting things around sort of where the responsibility lies for cybersecurity, but maybe we can move on to Will at Barclays. And as a bank within the network, what more could be done to protect the network?
Hi. So Barclays' central cybersecurity agenda is defined by having an intelligence-led model. So what we do at Barclays is we try and really understand our key adversaries, and how the criminals and the people who are looking to attack our clients and our networks are operating, what the tools, tactics, procedures, and the intentions that they have, and how we can map that into our own environments. So we can try and understand what happened, and then we can see if our controls and our security posture is appropriate for the threat. But we think that the incidents that have happened this year are kind of indicative of a trend. And that trend is about the criminal's return on investment model. Now, traditionally, we've seen criminals wanting to attack the client, hijack the kind of like session for the payment. But ultimately, as defences and hardening those online channels becomes more difficult, the criminals will look to monetize in different ways, and that's why we're seeing this shift to try and penetrate internal banking networks. So we think this is indicative of a trend that we have to respond to.
Okay, and you have a lot of experience outside the banking industry. So how does the banking industry really compare or stand up against other industries?
So funny, we touched upon this just earlier. I actually think that the finance sector, it kind of has this concept of being the hard target, because ultimately, from a cybercrime perspective, the financial institutions have a lot of experience dealing with fraud and actually cybercrime, because principally the financial institutions have been the principal targets of cyber criminal activity. And it is about that, I'll go back to that return on investment model. If the banks are hardened and constantly hardening, other sectors where there might be ability to monetize data, or there's a softer target in other industries, might be more become targeted. So touched upon ransomware. Now, ransomware, encryption of data, encryption of like key systems, etc. That's a growing threat. And that's not aimed at the financial institutions, that will be aimed at much wider industries. And I assume as somebody tracking the threat, you've seen this as well.
Yep. So we've seen a lot with SMEs in particular. Healthcare was being a big target for that kind of criminality as well. So exactly as Will says, I think it's opportunistic. We talk often, cybersecurity often talk about a waterbed effect. This idea that if you push down in one area, the crime's going to go to an adjacent area where it's not quite as tough for them to attack.
Okay, great. Thanks, James. And you set up Digital Shadows, which is a cybersecurity startup. Can you tell us a little bit about what exactly Digital Shadows does? As a company? Sure.
At Digital Shadows, we monitor the digital footprints of organisations from a security perspective, looking for three things. One, evidence of data loss online. Two, evidence of vulnerability. And three, tracking the threat to understand how their tactics are evolving, and which helps our clients to defend against them. So we call this process cyber situational awareness. But that sort of phrase, situational awareness, comes from the military. If you know what's going on around you, you can take sort of more effective actions.
And do you have any comments really on what happened within the Bangladesh Central Bank and also within the SWIFT network, like how you can either track that or prevent that? Or
so I think it's quite interesting to see that you've got the messaging network is a trusted capability. It's not the messaging network that's the weakness here. It's the defences of the banks themselves. And I think you can draw different conclusions about the relative levels of security in those organisations. I think still all businesses of all types are trying to get their heads around just how to effectively defend against this. And the truth is there's no silver bullet. There's no palliative for all the ills. So I think, cybersecurity has always been a tricky topic for businesses to engage with. So saying that there's different situations require different treatments. So I think because of that complexity, it's made it tough for institutions to respond sort of immediately to it. Now we know this is going on, we're in a much better place because we know how it's carried out. We can use this insight to sort of help shore up the defences and stop this from happening. And then it'll move on to the next thing. So, I'm sure that a lot of the work that Gottfried and his colleagues at SWIFT are doing is helping with that. But remember, that's 10,000 institutions. That's not going to take 5 minutes. That's a big project.
So, from an intelligence perspective, Bank of Bangladesh I think a lot of us in the community looked at the Bank of Bangladesh, and you can focus on the technical elements of the attack. But in the community, that type of attack, APT-style attacks, hiding yourselves in networks is relatively, that's not unique. I think what a lot of us were surprised at was the money laundering element of it. It is very rare for that type of money laundering to take place within cybercrime. I think that's what actually was the big shock, that, you had an adversary that was willing to steal, or had the capability to steal so much money. Compared to normal cybercrime, that was a real kind of step change.
It's a shift in the supply chain, I think it's fair to say.
Yep.
Okay, I'd like to bring in Jonathan. It's very interesting. Obviously, there's been just a massive increase in investment in cybersecurity startups, up to $3.8 billion in 2015, according to figures from CB Insights. But I know you set up, at the beginning of 2015, you set up Cyber London, or Cylon, which is an accelerator for cybersecurity startups. Can you give us a bit more information about how the accelerator works?
Thanks, Joy. That's absolutely right. We set up in 2015 to help to develop the companies like James's, the digital shadows of the future. And we did that based on two fundamental ideas. The first being that as all business shifts to digital, the requirement for good security around those businesses only increases. So just a massively increased need for good cybersecurity. And the second being that the UK is in an absolutely fabulous position to benefit from that market opportunity. I have a background in government. I worked in the Foreign Office and at Number 10 in the course of my career. Had exposure to the national security community, so some understanding of how government looked at this. It's one of those unusual areas, frankly, where government technology actually, in many cases, is ahead of private sector technology. Not very many of those, but I think this is one, or has been one. And we felt that there was a huge opportunity for UK-based companies to expand in this area, like James's, like Digital Shadows, to work with a very already sophisticated digital economy, and to seize the moment to become very significant businesses. But we thought that there was a relative lack of companies like James's emerging. In my last year in government, I wrote a memo on this issue for the Cabinet Office on the way in which we seem to produce relatively few fast-growing, super successful software businesses in this area, despite the fact that the UK is a global cyber superpower. I mean, if there was a Security Council of cyber nations, the UK would absolutely be on it. I mean, there's probably a P2 or P3 in this area, and the UK would be a part of it. And yet, James is rather, the exception, not the rule. There haven't been that many truly standout British-based technology companies. Lots of good services companies. Not very many outstanding software businesses. So we set up Cyber London expressly to try and find that talent, to give it a platform, to connect it into government and connect it into the private sector, established institutions, and to, if you like, give a helping hand to entrepreneurs doing interesting things in cyber.
Because as you say, Cylon isn't specifically for the financial industry or anything like that. But how do you find that the banks are they engaging with the startup community?
That's a great question. So just to sort of illustrate that, the partner, we have 5 big partners in the program. So we run it not for profit. We give a small amount of money to each of the teams that qualifies to take part. And we do that through a sort of sponsorship model. The sponsors at the moment are BAE Systems, Raytheon, KPMG, Freshfields, and Winton Capital, right? And you'll notice there's an absence there of, high street banks. Or major sort of city institutions, but what you shouldn't mistake that for is a lack of engagement by those institutions. We have every day on the program, we have people coming from Barclays and from HSBC and from other parts of the city to come and mentor, to take part, to see what's going on, to engage with the teams. We'd like much more. I'll be absolutely honest about that. But it's a work in progress.
Okay, and I know, Will, Barclays has an innovation lab. How much sort of cybersecurity focused companies are you seeing, or is that a focus within the lab?
Yeah, so Barclays is part of the RISE program and has 4 accelerated the kind of innovation hubs. They're in London, they're in New York, they're in Cape Town, and there's a solely dedicated one in Tel Aviv for cybersecurity. And actually, we've been reaching out into the fintech community to actually act as innovators in this space for us. Because you find this is a hugely fast-paced and moving environment, and you really need that type of innovation and kind of like smaller businesses to bring them on and like pull them into your environment. So, for instance, we sponsored one in New York, and I was actually dealing with them last week. Who were they essentially do cybersecurity training. They create environments to do hackathons, and we use them as part of almost a part of our recruitment process now. So that's been exceptionally useful for us. So yeah, we really are. I say we're quite big in this area.
Can I just say, I mean, we really admire what Barclays have done in this area. And the Techstars, the sort of fintech program, is a great example of what a large financial institution can do to support innovation and to engage with earlier stage companies. We decided we didn't want to sort of try and replicate what Barclays and others were already doing. It's really interesting that Barclays have chosen to do some dedicated cyber work in Israel. And it's absolutely the case, although it's a bit of a cliche, that Israel is this sort of amazing centre of cyber innovation. That is true, but it's not the only place where great stuff's happening. There's a really good reason why it happens there and why it's high quality there, and it's because of the structure of Israeli government support for this kind of technological development. If you cross the Atlantic and you go to the US, you have scale. I mean, just the sheer scale of the government market for cyber in the US is so significant that you get an ecosystem all of its own. Sorry, I get fined every time I use the word ecosystem, so that's one. Really, really significant around US government, and then not to mention the private sector. We felt that therefore it was worth doing something in the UK, where it doesn't look like Israel on one end of the spectrum, it doesn't look like the US on the other end of the spectrum, but there is a sweet spot in the middle where if you get the banks and if you get the city meaningfully involved, if you get the expertise that really does reside within bits of UK government, if you get the early stage investment community to engage, and if you get out, as we're trying to do, to the universities and the research centres, and you give people an opportunity, like we try to be generous. Like we're not trying to do this as a. I know that there are different models for doing this, and ours is that if this is a long process, this is quite hard. I mean, James would tell you this is not easy to do. The IP is hard to develop, and the sales cycles are long, and it's not easy. So we try and do it in a way that's kind of on the side of the entrepreneur and give them a helping hand.
Okay, and I know Swift has a InnoTry, which has been going on for quite some time, and Digital Shadows was actually one of the finalists in 2012. But Godfrey, are you seeing a sort of like a rise in sort of the number of cybersecurity companies you're seeing within InnoTribe, or how are you engaging with that community?
We have at Cybos this year, we have another session of InnoTribe, and this year's session will almost for 50% be dedicated to cyber, because we see exactly that. There's a whole wave of innovation going on, and indeed, I think it would be our diagnosis, and it's a bit of a cliche to say, but technology caused this problem to begin with. Before we had ATMs, before we had all these connections, there was no cyber problem, cyber fraud. We have the cyber fraud because of all these beautiful things that technology has brought us. Everything is connected to everything. Great convenience, but now we've got to deal with new ways of bad guys operating. So I think technology has created it, but technology can also help solve it. That's not to say that at the end of the day, I don't think, is a technology problem. It has to be about people, process, and technology. A lot of it is traditional fraud thinking, which banks have been good at. But technology plays a big role. We're aware of many firms, and I can tell you that ever since Bangladesh broke, I have got more emails from companies offering their services than we could fill an InnoTribe session with. So, we are aware of that. And by the way, in terms of location, yes, I would agree. Israel, London, the US. I would not rule out other parts of the world. I would not rule out China. I would not rule out Russia. This is truly a global phenomenon when it comes to solutions.
I would agree with you, but I think if you're trying to sell a service service to a London financial institution, I'm not sure your Russian or Chinese company is necessarily going to be as convincing as a British or an American.
That's true, but we deal with a lot of banks that are in other parts of the world, I guess. So yeah, we'll InnoTribe will have a big, and Cybels in general will have a big cyber flavor to it this year.
Excellent. And you brought up a number of things, Gottfried, such as, let's say, the Internet of Things, but also increased mobile connectivity like that. Do you think that's really increasing cyber risks because of the technology advances? Maybe I'll ask James this, just in terms of how you see, all these new developments. Is it creating at such a speed that it's actually hard to stay on top of it, or?
I think it's always a constant matching of innovation in defence as well as to match the innovation in attack. The fact is we are digital businesses today. We're not going to get any less digital over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. So it's natural that that we're going to have to continually match these two things. There are cases where occasionally the defence gets ahead of the game, but that's it's only a matter of time until the attack catches up, and vice versa. That's happened too. So I think it's just a natural part of digital business that we're going to continue this trend. I always like Ray Kurzweil wrote a book about the idea that you are constantly innovating to a point of the singularity, and I think that whether we'll ever get to the singularity in cybersecurity is a good question. I wonder what that would look like.
And Will, I was just going to ask you, like Gottfried said, you need to focus on people and processes, not just technology. And sometimes everyone, a lot of people say that the end user is the weakest link. How does Barclays deal with that in terms of how do you educate your staff, but also the consumers?
It's an interesting question because you can look at cybercrime and cybersecurity. This is highly technical subject matter, but the reality is most attackers are going to try and get into your network by sending someone an email, and they're going to click on a link. So you have to have very, very good education all the way through your organisation on cybersecurity hygiene. You have to start putting cybersecurity and security into your organisation by default, and we do have programs within Barclays where we are trying to constantly raise the bar on cybersecurity hygiene practices, because it is about raising the bar across the organisation.
So, Will, I'd be interested to ask you a question though, because all of the evidence that I've seen about those programs is that the effectiveness of them erodes incredibly quickly, and that if you send out just a sample message to your workforce, even after a training program, click rates and infection rates are straight back up to where they were pretty much straight away after the training.
Well, I suppose it's part of the solution. You have good endpoint protection, you have good message gateways, you do all the perimeter defense you can, and you try and educate your users, and you have to just keep on going.
Yeah. So it's an unfair question, but so I'm going to use it as a shameless plug for an innovator now. There's a team on our current program called Hook, and they are trying to tackle this exact problem, recognizing that sort of education and training is really important, but it's the effectiveness of it has proven limited to this point. And so they've sort of flipped the problem around, and they actually get the workforce to target each other. And in doing so, they actually get a sense of what works. As they're trying to sort of infect each other's computers, it raises very, very quickly their awareness of what a malicious email looks like, and the rates of awareness rise exponentially. It's really, really interesting. Now, they're a very, very early stage team, and so it's too early to say how successful they've been. But this is to this broader point of the problem being very much around the individual, about human behaviour. And I know you were interested to come on to sort of new technologies and the sort of buzzwords around AI and machine learning, but I think actually the guys on the panel here have really shown that a lot more effort is still required at the human level. And that's actually where we see quite a lot of work going at the moment. Insider threat. It's not malicious necessarily. It's either unknowing or poorly trained. But that is still a massive vulnerability, as Will was saying. So 75% of vulnerability is still sort of unconscious error on someone's part.
You can illustrate this quite well. If you go onto Google and type confidential, not for distribution, file type PDF, you're going to get a boatload of things indexed by Google that really shouldn't. And a lot of that stuff is no one's maliciously doing this. This is just accident and misadventure. So I think we all have this image of the sort of hacker in the hoodie going away. But actually, a lot of what happens is just accident and just poor.
That gives me an opportunity to plug somebody else.
Well, we'll just hold on that. Sorry, Godfrey, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to on the awareness programs. Yes, your click-through rates will go back up again after an initial campaign. But what you can achieve, especially with your own employees, is a better reporting behavior. Yeah, exactly. And that is very important because once you have reports, then you can actually follow up, and that greatly enhances your monitoring capability, especially for breaches on your own network. The other thing I would want to remark, a lot of this, especially in certain environments, is about basic hygiene, like the administrator account on a Windows box. Not a good idea to leave that open. Not a good idea to have a general password that is shared by everybody. Awareness of those type of things and fixing those type of holes you can achieve, I think, through education program. But that still is a lot of education, taking people through it, all of these things.
Okay, just before I open it up to the audience, so get ready with your questions. I'll just ask one more question, which is really about the move to information, sharing information in real time. And someone said to me, well, and it's not just about attacks, but also attempts. But obviously there's a big reticence amongst the banks to admit to anything that has either tried to happen or has happened, whether they've had a breach. But there's a lot of moves, like in Europe, to try and get to this real time. And I know SWIFT is also working quite hard with that. But what is it going to take to make the banks really talk to each other? And because these same attacks are happening. If it doesn't happen to Barclays, it will happen to HSBC or another. Sorry, Will?
So we actually think that this is one of the critical issues, if not the critical issue, which is breaking down traditional barriers between partners. Not partners, traditionally rivals. And certainly at Barclays, we're sponsoring the Cyber Defence Alliance, which is trying to bring the institutions together in an operational environment to share that type of data and also track and attribute our major adversaries with the National Crime Agency and government. And we definitely think that is the key point, because if I'm going to get attacked, somebody else is going to get attacked, and they keep going. So you have to share that data, you have to share it in real time, and you have to really break down a lot of barriers that have existed culturally and technically. I think that is the critical issue in the industry. How do you start breaking down those barriers?
We've seen some really good progress in this area, even in the vendor community. So what's been nice is it used to be like two security vendors would look at each other and not talk to each other and regard themselves as enemies. But actually now we're seeing a lot more collaboration, people recognizing they're part of a, to use Jonathan's word, ecosystem. Seriously, it's really important. I think really one of the really good things is things like the forensic reports get put in after the attacks are now being published publicly by a lot of the organizations, which is what has to happen to make this to make us really understand what's going on. So it's not going to happen overnight, though. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Godfrey, do you want to add anything? Or what kind of resistance are you finding amongst the SWIFT network, the banks that are involved with it?
I think you find in general the general reluctance of people. I mean, as I said, this is about trust. At the same time, I have to say that the current events do help. I mean, the fact that people see it is more common, that they're not the only one, etc., does help to do this. The other thing we do, at least, is we take the information and then we publish the indications of compromise, the modus operandi, etc., on an anonymous basis. And people see that, so that creates a bit of confidence that indeed their data will be shared only on an anonymous basis. I think there's also a role for supervisors and regulators to be played here, to have the frameworks in place that force banks to report it. And then it is what you see in the context of an FS-ISAC. It's often a layered approach. There's one layer that creates roundtables where people that really trust each other can share very intimate information. Then there are other fora where you can do it in a less intrusive way. So I think we're going to find our way around this, but overall, we find that events here have been helpful. People really are much more willing than they were at least a year ago to come forth with these things.
I'd agree with that. I'd also say that the UK again is I'm quite bullish on the UK's approach to this. National Cybersecurity Centre is a genuine attempt to try and marshal activity in a range of different fields. There are already information sharing organisations set up and in place. What we've seen over the last year is actually for more or less formal conversations going on between key security personnel in peer organisations. These guys, they talk to each other. They talk to each other all the time. They're at similar events. They're looking at similar vendors. They are sharing their insights. They are cooperating more than competing on which the good solutions are. And I think that can only be a good thing. Good companies will rise to the top. And in our own sort of little area of this, we're trying with at the sort of earlier stage of the program to almost give sort of innovators a stamp of approval. People, the companies that come through our program, we want people to know that that there has been a lot of pre-selection done with these guys, and they've gone through our program, and they've been vetted by the mentors and the more experienced guys that come in and speak to them. When they come out of our program, you can have some confidence that they're high quality, and those guys then go on and deliver meaningful solutions for larger organisations. And I think I think the trend is positive on the sharing side, but I agree with the other guys here that it's critical that continues. And I think that's goes without saying almost.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up to questions. We have a question over here and one in the back.
Hi, so thank you for a very interesting panel. One thing, so we've been talking a lot about reactive measures, so publishing reports of a breach, or talking about the Bank of Bangladesh mishap. And actually, at the company I work for, FTI Consulting, we have developed a practice of going into firms and giving a risk assessment for example, M&A takeovers, and giving a risk assessment of the company's cybersecurity before somebody invests huge amounts of money into such a company. So my question was sort of, is there also within the industry a strive to more prophylactic reporting? So, for example, a section of the annual report, this is just spitballing, of the annual report of a standardized assessment of the cybersecurity of such a company?
So there's a couple of firms. If you look at folks like BitSight or Security Scorecard, they're trying to create a sort of Standard and Poor's rating for companies on the internet, and they are having a very effective time both in the insurance sector and in this M&A area. I think actually being proactive is a massive. You talk about reactive, but there is actually a lot of proactive activity going on, both in risk assessment and in also in monitoring as well. So it's all about the near misses that you get, not just the incidents that you get. So monitoring what's going on even the attempts is valuable, and certainly something we get involved a lot in is monitoring what people are trying to get in, and that tells you about where they're headed in terms of direction.
Jonathan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to echo James's comment that this is a really hot space. There is a lot of early stage work going on into automating the sort of predicting, the rating of cyber defences. I mean, until now, that's been a growth area for services businesses, consulting businesses. We're going to come in, we're going to do an audit, we're going to look at you, we're going to advise you, then we're going to sell you a load of stuff, right? And that's been successful business. Chapeau. That's being automated. And there are lots of very, very good companies out there. Now, the key thing is how well can they deliver that insight to management in a way that management can really do something about it, and they can make good decisions and improve their defense, see it improve, see the results. Right? It's going to take some time for the really outstanding products to emerge in that area, but I suspect in the next 2 to 3 years we'll see some really big companies in that area.
I would want to add the audience for that. The audience for that is not just the companies itself. I think if this were to really work, this gives the people who do business with them also something to go upon and to adapt their controls accordingly. And in that sense, it's a bit like a credit rating. You can still get a loan, just you'll pay a different interest rate. And I think the same you might see between banks doing business with each other over a network like ours. That scoring may drive the amount of controls that are at the other end if they receive the payments, etc. So yes.
Okay, great. We have another question over there.
Thank you. So One word I was surprised we haven't heard was blockchain. So I wanted to understand to what extent
ecosystem.
to what extent blockchain is a viable solution to cybersecurity. So how safe is it? And then B, how big a threat or opportunity is blockchain for the likes of Swift? You must see it as either a direct competitor to your business line or as an opportunity for you to either incorporate it into your current Swift network.
And the heavens opened up when you mentioned blockchain.
It's a sign. So I've seen a little bit in blockchain around the identity space. Very interesting on identity access control. The fact that identities are shared all over the world at the same time. I think that's a very good application of the technology, and I've seen a few startups in that particular area. The other area that's really interesting at the moment, people like Elliptic looking at, is looking at the movement of money within the blockchain, where blockchain is used for digital currency, Ethereum or Bitcoin, whichever application it is. And I think there is some value in that. The problem is that criminals also tumble those blockchains quite a bit. So you might see movement, but it's difficult to decode because a lot of it's been through a tumbler, so you might not actually see the results.
Anyone else? Blockchain, anyone?
We've been surprised how few applicants to our program have been blockchain technologies. We expected more. There is an entire sort of area of the market which is all blockchain. But maybe that has focused really on immediate applications of blockchain to money and money transfer and those things. In our cyber area, we've seen fewer than we expected. The one that we have had through the program was about document verification and identity verification. A fantastically interesting little company, and we'll see whether they do well. But you know, we've seen less than we thought we would.
Okay. Do we have any more questions? There's one right there.
You have the expert on blockchain at the back there.
Oh, we have an expert on blockchain. What? Is the microphone?
Hello? Oh. The next panel is on blockchains and distributed ledgers and things, actually. And I'm on it, so come along. We'll have a chat. So I think most banks now, or most good banks, have accepted that the customer's computer is hacked and you can't stop it. So hence all of the little digital, cap reader devices. When a bank's going to make the leap to all of their internal computers are hacked and you can't trust any of the internal computers, and also start moving to secure hardware for the internal transactions, right? You secured the last mile, but the insides of the system are still completely, based on PDFs and Windows boxes and other stuff.
Well, maybe this is the singularity we were talking about earlier, right? So, when is all PII eventually known, you're going to have to change the way you authenticate people and the way that you deal with them. But I do think that it's not the case that all computers will be hacked. I think it's a case that some computers on the network are hacked, but if you know where your information assets are and you place the correct controls around them. I mean, CESG observed 90% of all the hacks they observe in very, very serious cases will be sorted out with just simple controls today. And it doesn't actually take that much to protect it if you really focus on the right computers and the right part of the network. So I believe that not all computers inside a bank will be hacked. I think you just got to focus your resources in the right place.
Godfrey and Will?
What I will say is I think in general the move towards assume some form of breach is unstoppable. I think you see it everywhere. You go from perimeter security to assuming some guys will make it through the perimeter, and you're going to have layered defenses, indeed protecting your core assets in a way. I think banks are going to two-factor authentication inside their systems for key administrator, for key systems. So I would say absolutely. That, again, given the complexity of back office systems, etc., that will not be overnight. That will be a long journey. But I at least see that movement everywhere.
Okay, I think we have one more question here.
We have a banker.
It's true.
Sorry, Will, go ahead.
The kind of like the thought that all your computers are going to be hacked in like a major network, I don't agree with that. But I do essentially echo the thoughts that you do need to understand what your most vulnerable environments are, what your crown jewels are, what is the absolute critical things that you need to know and understand and protect, and put the layers of controls and protection on.
Great, thanks.
Hi. Is it not going? There we go. So thank you all for your insight. We've talked a lot about cybersecurity from a sort of innovation and technological perspective, but I'm curious from your position in the industry, who are the people on the other end? Who are the criminals involved here right now and in the future? Are they organized groups? Are they sort of rogue individuals? And I guess Will made this point earlier, which was that Barclays approaches it with a sort of a standard, a tailored approach towards the opposition here. So I'm curious about how you think that will develop.
So I think the industry would say that certain parts of the country, what we'll classify as hard to reach jurisdictions in Eastern Europe and Russia, have traditionally had the elite crime groups where they're highly professional and sophisticated. But I think just vast swathes, quantifying vast swathes of like that problem space is naive, because ultimately in cybercrime, the fundamentals are there. It's low risk, high reward. Attribution is difficult. You are going to pull in lots of jurisdictions and lots of people into this space because the fundamentals of a crime type are there. So traditionally the focus has been on key adversaries in that part of the world, APTs, but I definitely think that cybercrime is a global problem and will continue to rise in other jurisdictions, and you'll find specialist cybercrime and cyber criminals much closer to home.
It's quite just to support Will's response there. Every type you just mentioned is the threat, from quite sophisticated hacktivism through to organised crime, through to nation states. And to be frank, you don't put them into boxes. They all interact, and they also interact with internal resources in your own business. So it'd be nice to put them all in neat little boxes and classify it. Just not possible, because but you can talk. If you think about it in a structured way, it helps you to assess your risk and it helps you to assess the threats.
What I find interesting is not one person has asked about the Brexit impact on cybersecurity, but I think what I'm going to do is finish the panel with one more question to the panelists, to all of them, which is really about the increasing cyber skills gap, how to attract young people, but also harking back to the panel that was on previous, which was women in banking. How do we attract more women as cybersecurity experts? Jonathan, would you like to?
So I'm very happy to kick off with that. I mean, I'm proud to run a program that is led by a woman, managed by a woman, and 2 out of the 3 founders are women. So we're bucking the trend a little bit, but I would be the first to admit that it's only a tiny bit of progress. Much more is needed. I'm going to make a very direct pitch. So we've just launched a new program, which is just a week long. Instead of 3 months, which our main program is, which is aimed very much at people who might think they've got something to contribute in this field. It's called Hut Zero. It's going to be run at Cyber London in West London. It's free. In fact, the government's paying for it, which we're delighted about. And the idea there is that we get more diversity into this area. We get people from many different backgrounds. If you've come out of the banking industry, if you've come out of government, if you're still in university but you've got a great idea, you're not yet ready to raise capital, go it alone, take a big chance. This is something we're actively trying to address. We're trying to get 20 people in September onto our program. It's only a small number, but it's a start. Because we recognize that there is a skills gap here. There is a shortage. There aren't enough startups. There aren't enough talented people going into this area, and it's not a diverse enough community. So I'm afraid I can't tell you the picture's rosy, but we are doing something about it.
Excellent. Thanks, James.
So the figures are a bit out of whack in terms of the number of women working in cybersecurity versus men. We need to do something about that. If 51% of the people on the planet really do have something to contribute to this topic, we need to get better at bringing them in. I've been really interested in, there are some good women in cybersecurity forums. In particular, I've been quite interested on Kickstarter. There's a lady called Jane Frankland has just funding a book around women in cybersecurity, trying to get the industry to positively discriminate in this way. And I think that's really exciting that's happening. We as a company, we're still about 20% of our employees who work in the security area are women. But I'm very glad to say our development team was all female for the first year. So I feel like we've achieved a little bit of something along that journey.
But I also remember you said to me something about the cyber skills gap for the criminals as well.
Very much so. So, we find it hard to recruit all startups will tell you recruitment's difficult, especially true in cybersecurity. But that's actually interesting. It's also hard for criminals to do that. And we did a study on this, and if someone's interested in the paper, ping me after this. We examined how hackers recruit their own talent, and it turns out it's just as hard for them as it is for defenders. So quite interesting.
Thanks, Will.
It's an interesting one. Just very quickly on Brexit, on another point, was the impact on Europol, and essentially the UK will likely have to come out of the organisation and the European Cybercrime Centre. And certainly for people that are interested in attribution and prosecution of key offenders, I think the community realises that the best way of getting after cyber criminals is these supranational structures that can break down jurisdictional barriers. And I, for one, am interested in what that looks like coming forward, because certainly as somebody who used to work closely with EC3 and an ex-colleague sat in the audience from EC3, the UK coming out of that, that's going to be something as in the UK cybercrime space that we want to be improved. That's a big impact on attribution and prosecution.
So European arrest warrant in particular, I think, is going to be key. So,
okay, but do you want to make a comment in terms of, like, you've been in cybersecurity for a while and stuff? What would be your main pitch to someone who might be considering it as a profession? As a profession, well, cybercrime, cybersecurity is one of the most fascinating spaces and subject matters to be involved in. It's constantly evolving, and all the policies, procedures, none of this is being fixed yet. All this is developing. It's exceptionally exciting to be in. So if you're interested in technology, policy, operations, all these things, cybersecurity.
So I'm just going to pitch direct to people's wallets, because genuinely, if you're looking at areas attracting significant venture capital at high valuations, it's this section, it's this sector. We have had a company on our program that was only a year old, valued at £10 million already, £2 million of investment in. They're doing very nicely, thank you very much, and they're going to be a £100 million company within 2 to 3 years, I would say. So, just on the pure financial level, there is money to be made in this sector.
Godfrey, do you have something to add?
Maybe the only thing I would add is this is called cyber security, and I think we should not just focus on the cyber part, but also security. It requires both people that have computer science literate, but also people who can think security, which is a completely different mindset and doesn't come natural to a lot of trained computer scientists. And you do need people who can think in terms of fraud. How do you prevent fraud? Some of the more traditional prevention thinking in the mix. Otherwise, you're just going to be off on your... And in terms of gender, all I can add is that I have a 17-year-old daughter who wants to become a computer scientist, who's is coding all day long, etc. So that'll be my contribution to making this more gender.
She should apply to Hut Zero.
Okay, well, please thank my panelists.